On a small street far from the city center, nestled among old houses that have stood for decades, there is a house numbered 72. This house, with its faded red brick walls and foggy windows, seems forgotten by time. But it's not its appearance that makes the house famous, rather the strange stories and unexplained mysterious events that have taken place there, making it one of the most haunted houses in the area. It all began when the first family moved into the house at number 72 in the 1950s. This family consisted of Mr. Tan, Mrs. Lowe, and their young daughter, and Mr. Tan was a civil servant, Mrs. Lowe was a teacher, and they decided to move there to start a new life. The house seemed quiet and cozy, perfect for a small family. But from the very first days, they realized something was not right. Every night, after the family had gone to bed, they would hear strange noises echoing from under the floorboards. These weren't the sounds of rats or the wind, but heavy footsteps, as if someone was walking through the house. Mr. Tan inspected the house thoroughly, but found nothing unusual. However, the noises continued, making it impossible for the family to sleep peacefully. One morning, while Mrs. Lowe was preparing breakfast, she noticed a small bloodstain on the kitchen floor. The blood seemed to have appeared out of nowhere, as the floor had been spotless the night before. Mrs. Lowe cleaned up the blood, but the uneasy feeling in her heart lingered. As time passed, the strange occurrences increased. The lights in the house would suddenly flicker on and off, doors would slam shut on their own, and the air would often carry the scent of jasmine, a fragrance Mrs. Lowe was certain no one in the house used. The paintings on the walls would tilt, or sometimes mysteriously flip upside down. But the most terrifying event happened on a stormy night. Little Lynn, who was just 6 years old at the time, suddenly woke up and saw a woman in a long white dress, with her long hair covering her face, standing at the foot of her bed. The woman said nothing, simply standing there, but her gaze pierced into Anne's mind, and screamed in terror, waking up her parents. By the time Mr. Tan and Mrs. Lowe rushed into the room, the woman had vanished, leaving only a cold chill and the overwhelming scent of jasmine. And told her parents about the incident, but they dismissed it as just a nightmare. However, from that night on, Anne began to change. She became quiet, distant, and frequently talked to an invisible friend, whom she claimed was the woman in the white dress, and said that the woman was very sad and lonely, and she would often sit by Anne's bed at night, telling her stories about the past. The stories Anne recounted frightened Mr. Tan and Mrs. Lowe, and said that the woman had once lived in the house but had died a tragic death. She was murdered by her cruel husband and buried under the floor of the house. Her spirit could not move on, so she remained there, seeking release. Mr. Tan, initially skeptical of ghosts, began to worry for his daughter. He decided to investigate the history of the house. Through conversations with old neighbors, he learned that the house at number 72 had once belonged to a wealthy family. The husband was a successful businessman, but he was notorious for being abusive. His wife, a beautiful and gentle woman, endured much suffering. Then one day, she mysteriously disappeared, and no one ever saw her again. The husband later left the house, and it remained abandoned for years before being sold. The rumors about the woman's disappearance and her husband's cruelty only increased Mr. Tan's anxiety. He decided to hire a shaman to perform a ritual to free the woman's spirit. The ritual took place one evening when the sky was dark and rain poured down heavily. The shaman lit incense, burned candles, and chanted, hoping to guide the woman's spirit to the afterlife. But as the ritual was underway, a strong gust of wind blew out all the candles. The entire house was plunged into darkness, and a terrifying screeching sound echoed from beneath the floor. Mr. Tan and Mrs. Lowe were horrified, and then suddenly let out a strange laugh, one that did not sound like that of a child. The shaman felt a cold presence and advised the family to leave the house immediately. The family quickly packed their belongings and fled the house at number 72 that night. After they left, the house returned to a state of abandonment, with no one daring to approach it. Neighbors would occasionally see the figure of a woman in a white dress standing by the window, staring out at the street with a distant look. The house at number 72 became a symbol of haunting and horror. No one dared to step inside, and the stories of the woman's spirit buried beneath the floor continued to be told as a warning of the mysteries that had yet to be uncovered.